Good morning. Today is the 28th of April. And instead of, just doing one single topic, I want to kind of take stock today of various topics that interlink. And then later I will get back to more specific topics that I highlight. I think we can all agree that the world is in chaos, if not in crisis. And it's very difficult to put your finger on any one specific that is more important on a given day than the other, or is more important to a given group of people than the other. I think it's fair to say that even though we've lived in the 20th century through various world wars and crises and local wars and so forth, the disarray in the world right now is really, in some senses, second to none, even in the last century, or even if you go to the beginning of the 20th century. It's not that bad things didn't happen. Yes, World War I, World War II, and then regional wars and so forth. But the entire unraveling of the international system, which we are party to right now, is really, in some sense, a historic first. Some of the institutions which try to create order in the world actually go back to 1980s, well, 1880s, 1890s, before you ever get to World War I, because there was an attempt to create an international court of justice, which in fact the precursor of the current one goes back to the 1880s, 1890s. And there were beginnings to be sort of international institutions which we are now gotten used to and which were formalized by the League of Nations and so forth. So creating some kind of order in the world goes back quite a long way, and the unraveling of this world has really been very precipitous and fairly quickly. I am not suggesting that in the last 80 years or last 100 years, we didn't have economic crisis, military crisis, and political crises. But at this point, we have crises here, there, and everywhere of every imaginable magnitude and so forth. Now, it is also true, of course, that there are far more independent so-called sovereign countries in the world right now. We have almost 200. And earlier on, we had, a handful of colonial countries, and then we had the decolonization, which slowly took place in the late 50s and the 60s. And so more and more countries were added, some of them little pipsqueak countries, islands, and so forth, but also, fairly major and prominent countries. So let me just run down some of these things and then stop here and there and discuss them in somewhat greater terms. One of the things that has happened in the last few days, of course, was the burial of the Pope, and big international happening, non-governmental happening. There are about 1.4 billion Catholics in the world, and not only the ceremony of the burial, but the conclave that will take place now to decide a new person is not just of religious relevance, but political relevance. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Concave, which is very much worth seeing. Very excellent movie, excellently acted, except the very tiny end is sort of a little odd and peculiar. But basically, you get a sense as to what the forthcoming discussions will be. Well, why do they matter to anybody who is not a Catholic? Well, they matter because the Catholic Church is an important institution in a lot of countries, and increasingly the role that the Catholic Church plays is less in Western countries and more in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Latin America used to be very Catholic. Increasingly, it's also become Pentecostal. But many parts of Asia, including the Philippines, the Catholic Church plays an important role, and it plays an important role in quite a few African countries. I might just editorialize to say there will be a push on to name the next pope from outside of Europe again, and since the current pope who just died was from Latin America, I think Africa and maybe the Pacific will be looked at. There will be candidates from Africa, there will be candidates from the Philippines, for example, etc. And one of the interesting things as I move into the actual politics of governments here is that many of the church in, for example, Africa is very, very conservative. And one of course, the political debates which the conclave will consider is whether the next pope should also be a follower of somewhat liberalizing aspects of the Catholic Church, or whether one returns to very much more conservative pope. Why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant, of course, in countries, let's take some African countries, where the Catholic Church plays a fairly vital role. And why is this relevant to any of the rest of us? Well, for example, it has a lot to do with reproduction, birth control, and so forth. So this sort of social issues, which is pushed by the Catholic Church, but even more so pushed by the more conservative aspects of the Church. So while we may think this, if you watch any of this on TV, this is all very ceremonial and doesn't have much to do with the rest of us who are not Catholic, I would offer the idea that, in fact, for quite a few countries in the world, as well as for some of global politics, the Catholic Church is not an irrelevant, non-governmental organization. So getting back to the focus on more obviously interstate and intergovernmental organization and politics, let me give you a small quote from an article that's in the current Atlantic magazine, which happens to be very good, where Trump admits that he had some difficulties during his first administration, but offers the notion that now he is in charge of both the country and the world. So, with that in mind, the US has probably done under Trump in the last 100 days more unraveling of the norms of the international system, creating chaos, not just in the economy, global economy, which he certainly has, but chaos for international institutions and for international policies. How far he can push these and how much it will really unravel the global structure, which was built slowly and certainly was intact, more or less. It had problems, but was intact until Trump became president, is an open question. But dangers lurk here, there, and everywhere. And not only is the world economy come unraveled, but many of the conflicts in the world are, if anything, more uncertain and more dangerous, both in terms of spreading and in terms of the loss of life and arms and so forth. Let me just briefly focus in on Europe. Europe's economy, its relationship to the United States, is a serious issue. These are our closest allies. Yes, there's NATO, but NATO is being attacked by the Trump administration. Yes, there's a European Union, but the European Union has to cope with the economic disarray caused by Trump's policies. Yes, there is the Ukrainian war, which is unresolved and which has unnerved very many European countries. I've talked about this before and I will so again, but let me just say that the situation in the Ukraine, plus the uncertainty of what role the US playing, is it supporting Russia, is it going to wash its hands of the whole Ukrainian business, has not only led European institutions like NATO to take stock and to figure out what to do, but also has led individual European countries to figure out that they better spend more on the domestic military, quite aside from their contributions to NATO. I mean, the Scandinavian countries, the Balkan countries, are all scared. I mean, if you are Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, even countries like Sweden and Norway, you're saying to yourself, if the US butts out and the Russians, for all practical purposes, run over Ukraine, some of us may be next. And while NATO may give us some protection, we also probably have developed national protection. So you have, in a sense, a remilitarization, which one thought was not necessary, especially in the presence of NATO and perhaps strengthening NATO, but you have a national idea in many countries in Europe that you need to remilitarize. This is bad in several ways, namely resources that could be spent on climate change and social programs and so forth are diverted to military buildups. So if one looks at countries which have used most of their tax resources for domestic improvement and so forth, it's a sad commentary that they're now going to have to divert some of their resources to building up their domestic military strength along with NATO. The uncertainty of the US pulling out, both out of Ukraine support and supporting the Russians by design or default, and questioning NATO and questioning our obligation to the various post-World War II alliances is taken very seriously in Europe. Europe is also affected, as our allies, but the whole immigration issue. Yes, everybody is concerned about large immigrant groups coming into their countries and changing their cultures. But the ruthlessness with which Trump is attaching US policy domestically in the United States in terms of immigration, and the nixing of American immigration obligations, for example, for those people who helped us in Afghanistan, and simply saying, well, after all, I mean, these people may have risked their lives in the US activities in Afghanistan, and we promised them they can come to the US, but forget about that. We don't want any more of those people. There is, of course, a large element of racism involved. Suffice it to say that it is difficult, especially for homogeneous societies, for example, many European societies, to integrate large numbers of people from other societies, other ethnic backgrounds, and so forth. But it is also realistic to assume that in countries where the birth rates are going down, which includes the United States, includes almost all European countries, even includes China, they will have to import labor. And if you import labor, you have to import labor where there is a labor surplus at the moment. One of the hotspots for labor surplus is in Africa. And by the way, the propaganda that we get, that all of these sort of Africans are trying to move into Europe and even trying to move into the US, are all a bunch of, young adults who are going to sit on the streets if you visited Europe and try to peddle wares on the streets and so forth. Actually, the push of immigration from especially West Africa, but also other parts into Europe, are very often upwardly mobile young adults with very often considerable skills and education who see themselves as not getting gainful employment and having to live under the instability of their own countries, are trying to therefore go to Europe, where they assume their white-collar skills can be deployed. So that's a whole subject we will have to discuss at some other time. But we have many wrong notions in our brain as to who these people are and who is trying to come. The image in the United States in particular is that, poor Hispanics without education coming from rural areas are trying to come over the border. And surely this has happened in the past from Mexico and Central America. But you better believe that a lot of people who are trying to escape Venezuela because of its politics and then have gone to Colombia are not illiterate rural workers at all, but are middle-class people trying to find some place where they can live in peace and work and contribute to the society. So the prejudice about immigrants is really kind of very counterproductive, both in terms of what countries, industrial countries which a low birth rate have, and also wrong-headed in terms of imagining the type of people that are actually, quote unquote, invading their countries. Then, of course, to move into an entirely different direction are all the unresolved issues in the Middle East, which haven't gotten much focus actually in the last few weeks. The crisis in Gaza is unending. The deaths are unending. The bombardments of Israel in Gaza are unending. Israel is now taking over chunks of Gaza already. Whether or not he will allow Trump to build hotels, it's unclear. But what is happening to Gaza is essentially continues to be a nightmare. And by any standards of contemporary international law, what you really do have these days is illegal. It is genocide. It is whatever. However, one wants to support Israel and understands that Israel was attacked. What is happening in Gaza now and what is happening in the West Bank is unacceptable by any standards of post-World War II human rights law and international law. And of course, in the last couple of weeks, there's been very little focus on it, by and large. And Israel can pretty much continue to do what it wants to do because the Trump administration is supporting it, and the United States keeps giving arms to the Israelis. So for all practical purposes, where we are at in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that a two-state solution is some kind of distant creative imagining. What is happening to the West Bank is appalling right now. And what is happening in Gaza is appalling by any standards of any international law and any justification based on the fact that Israel was attacked. You might want to argue with this, but I think that not just or not just people who are said to be anti-Semitic are making these comments. These comments are made here, there, and everywhere at this point. Now, in addition to what's happening in Gaza, Israel, you might have noticed that the US is busy attacking Yemen. And it seems to be the pet project at the moment of the Defense Department and the flailing Secretary of Defense. The reason we're bombing Yemen, of course, is that Yemen is interfering with the shipping traffic. And supposedly, we're trying to disable the Houthis in Yemen from doing that. I think this is not going to happen. That is to say, the Houthis will not be defeated very easily. Yes, there will be more killing of Yemenis. And the real future of this whole conflict will also have to do with something with the Iranian negotiations. As you know, we're now in negotiation of seeing whether or not some kind of agreement can be found again in Iran in terms of them not developing a nuclear weapon. I think Iran sees the writing on the wall that if it doesn't reach some kind of satisfactory agreement with the United States, it's going to have the hell bombed out of them by the Israelis, which have promised to do so. They're only holding up because the US is having negotiations. And so both in terms of the economy of Iran and Iran's future, it looks as if Iran has a lot of motivation. And the irony, of course, is that the treaty an agreement that existed before during Trump 1 got out of it. And now he's trying to make arrangements which are not all that dissimilar before. Now, the reason Iran is linked with Yemen is the fact that it has supplied Yemen with weaponry. And in some senses, people think that Yemen is simply doing the bidding of Iran. That is to say, they're completely under control of Iran. I think that's somewhat overrated. It is true that the Houthis and Yemen is acting with Iranian arms and to some extent is doing what Iran wants them to do. But I think they're not quite as interdependent with Iran as sometimes is argued. And the conflict of the Houthis with the rest of Yemen is an ongoing conflict which is not going to be resolved even by American bombing of Yemen. The Houthis, I think, will survive American bombing. And of course, the Houthis have said, or Yemen will get out of disturbing the boat traffic as soon as Israel stops, attacking Gaza. So Yemen, in a sense, says it is acting on behalf of the conflicts both in Lebanon and in Gaza under the auspices of the Israeli bombings and so forth. So if some kind of peace, temporarily or long-term, in Gaza can be found, and if Israel would stop bombing Lebanon, it is conceivable that the Yemenis will say, we will quit bombing the ships, attacking the ships, and maybe the US will stop attacking Yemen. Not so clear in my mind that this will all happen very smoothly. And that, of course, means, I've just mentioned Lebanon. Lebanon and Israel had a peace treaty. And nevertheless, contrary to the agreement, Israel is bombing Lebanese sites. It has done in the last few days. It did so before, even in the capital. And it is saying that the reason it is bombing is because there are Hezbollah cells there, and it wants to get rid of those. Whether this will heat up to an out conflict with Lebanon again is not clear. But the best way to put it is to say that fishy things are going on as well. So if one thinks that the Israelis are only busy in Gaza at this point, it is also the case that they're bombing Lebanon again. Which leads me to a very different topic, which is non-governmental organization. You may recall that UNRWA has been the organization, international institution, supplying food to the Gazans, and they're now being attacked, bombed. Excuse me, and are being prevented from supplying food to the Gazans. So the Gazans are once again starving, not having access to water. The Israelis are saying that they don't recognize UNRWA as a neutral organization, and that they don't buy the idea that UNRWA is an international institution which is neutral. Well, UNRWA, of course, has been deeply embedded in Gaza for years, running schools and so forth. And most of the UNRWA facilities run by the Gazans and helping hospitals, schools, and so forth have been bombed to smithereens by the Israelis. And most recently, they've also said that they will not tolerate them bringing in food supplies, and that is the basis of food supplies for the Gazans. So not only are states involved and armies involved, but also supposed neutral international institutions. And it's the really non-governmental international institutions, the World Food Program and so forth, are also having a hard time getting any kind of support into Gaza. You will recall that about a week ago, the Israelis bombed and killed people in a convoy of ambulances. And it was, I think 30 people died, something like that. It was said at the time that they didn't know they were ambulances because they didn't have lights to indicate that there were ambulances. And then it turned out that that was a mistake. The lights were on. One of the victims of that particular bombing had a cell phone, and when it started, he took cell phone photographs of the ambulances all lit up. Then he himself was killed, and when he was buried, they noticed his cell phone, and on his cell phone were the pictures of the ambulances, or it might have even been a film of the ambulances. So the Israelis said they were terribly sorry, they made a mistake. Yes, everything was lit up. So at this point, I think we have close to anarchy in that part of the world. And it is not resolved, and it is going to be one of the future issues. At the moment, the Trump administration seems to be less focused on the Middle East, other than on Yemen and Iran negotiations, than on Gaza and the West Bank. So we will see when they will return their full attention, and whether or not they will critique the Israelis or have an impact on the Israelis or will send fewer arms to Israel. None of that is clear. So let me switch to a very different topic just for 2 minutes, and to say that the US under our president is also creating havoc, not just in economic circumstances and ongoing conflicts, but havoc in things like climate change, which arguably is one of the top issues that needs to be addressed by the world. You might have noticed in the papers that we're now going to do deep sea mining in order to get at minerals that we need for our various computer and chip productions. That, by the way, I would just like to call your attention to, happens to also be illegal. There is something called the law of the sea, the Law of the Sea conference was ratified in 1997, I believe. And in any event, the Law of the Sea has rules about not just what you can do in your territorial sea, how many miles out you are in control of, it's part of your sovereignty, but also has rules about the deep sea. So we're violating that. If we're violating it, I suppose everybody else can violate it. This will have incredible impact on the life of the sea and the climate aspects of it. So this is something very seriously we should look at. Everything having to do with climate, which arguably is the most important issue for humans in the next 50 years, century, is in disarray. Very little attention is being paid to it. The US has essentially mostly washed its hands of any interest in the matter. So ocean beds, minerals, climate agreements, as you know, we're not part of the Paris Agreement. We got out of that. But we're also doing things which, if you at least adhere to some of the fundamentals of the Law of the Sea and climate series, we should not be engaged in. So what have I'm running over a little bit. What have I said? There's disarray in our military aspects. There's disarray in our foreign policy. There's disarray in climate aspects. There's disarray in economic aspects. There is a world of disarray right now. And you can almost say that some aspects of it are in a state of anarchy. And what the President of the United States says, well, never mind, I'm in control. I'm now running the world. It's delusional, and how we're going to get out of it and how much damage there will be done more damage will be done in the years to come is not clear. But the world is currently in a state of disarray that it has not seen. It has had, of course, world wars and so forth, but disarray at almost every level: political, economic, environmental, climate change. We should hang in there and keep ourselves informed, and I'll get back to more specific topics next time. See you in 2 weeks.